Welcome to Paleocrat Diaries. My name is David Cholewa, contributing editor, and I am pleased today to be joined by a series of speakers that were present at the Catholics in Communion Conference, which was put on by the TradRecovery Apostolate. So I am pleasantly delighted to welcome. We have here Jeremiah, Andrew, and Dom. Yeah. How is everyone doing this evening?
Doing wonderful. Thanks for the invite.
Dude, this is awesome. I've had an amazing day, and it's been good to exalt his name in all the earth. Seriously, it's just been a day of joy, really, and getting to spend time with my son, Athanasius, and just talking to him as he's preparing for the upcoming year and reflecting on the trip that we went on that was amazing. And I got to meet these guys. I got to meet, and of course, David, right? David's my man. But Andrew and Dom, never met face to face, and saw him at the conference, right? Saw Dom at the conference, and then got to meet Andrew at the next conference. So we had two of them: the Creator Conference with Kyle, and after that we had the Catholics in Communion Conference, which is what this is about. And it was amazing to meet Andrew. In fact, I know it'll come up at some point, but we have a pretty cool, a pretty interesting story that, when he was talking to me about him and his wife and different things, or the complimentary way that his apologetic, once I heard it, my mouth just dropped. And I realized we talked the same language. And I was so overjoyed. And so, yeah, it's been an amazing time ever since. And it's been a good day.
Yeah, I'm ready to stop. I'm ready to stop lifting glass and start lifting some ideas with you guys.
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, I know it was really good for us to all meet in the deep real, as we like to say at Paleocrat Diaries, the importance of incarnational relationships. And 3 of the 4 of us curiously drove to the conference. Only Dom flew. And so many of us got to see the beautiful views and landscape that is Montana. So an obscure, isolated place for this conference, but it was good to meet. And but we'll get to those things. We've had a week to sort of digest our thoughts and our experiences. So I wanted to first off open the floor to any sort of preliminary thoughts and ideas before we get into the questions that I've submitted to you all. So Andrew, any preliminary thoughts?
Oh, just about kind of like general impressions of the conference.
Yeah, I submitted a series of questions, but before that, is there anything we wanted to sort of comment on?
Yeah, I mean, for starters, I can't express enough my gratitude to the Diocese of Helena, Bishop Vetter, and Father Gilbaugh for opening up his parish to us to be able to use for this conference. It was really a beautiful location. It was a beautiful building. What Father Gilbaugh has done in his beautifying of the sanctuary was really, really inspiring, and it was really great to be in there. So, I mean, hats off to him and to the bishop for welcoming us into the diocese and into that parish, because it's one of the things that really made the magic of the weekend, I think.
Oh yeah, I agree 100%. Right? It was awesome, and that was a big question. People were like, well, why Montana? It's kind of a weird place out there, like, to hold a conference. And it's the first conference of its kind for this group. And so it was a good dare. It was a good risk, because I think with hindsight, and I anticipated it. I was probably the main guy pushing, saying, keep it there, because it would make it more relational, without a doubt. It would make it where you're kind of away from things, which is the opposite of what we deal with every day, right? And what we're kind of dealing with in addressing the topics we're addressing. But, sitting there, the way we do prayer throughout the day, it was just so perfect. And you could walk outside and it was going to be quiet, except the airport. We saw some great airplanes, in fact, fly over, right? And so, but it was so amazing. I think that, I think it's the beginning of something quite large. And I told Laura that. I said that she's kind of the mother of a movement, and she proved it, in fact, by the pangs that she endured in the process, because it was so unfair and brutal. It was ugly. There's a lot of I'm sorries that should be said. I mean, in private. And so I hope that as we discuss this, that they'll see the same thing, and then they'll rethink, and reimagine, and say, what did we do? How far out have we gotten? And so I think and it's going to be great. I was working on the MP3s today. So do not get upset. They are coming and they're going to be good. I had to, fix some audio on some of them and video stuff. We're working on that part. So I'm putting in many hours of work every day to make sure that we can get as many as we can, all of them available ASAP. And so you can download one or download all of the various speeches that were at the conference.
Right. Dom, any thoughts?
Yes, this conference, I came back from the Catholic Creator Conference in Steubenville that Jeremiah was at as well. And that was a pure adrenaline rush, getting to meet a bunch of other Catholics online, trying to spread, the beauty of the faith. And this was a lot more serious. It felt like a retreat, like a prayer retreat, right? And the atmosphere, the mountains in the background, it was very quiet little town. The church was off to the side. There was a big baseball field next to it. So that was wonderful. And to second what Andrew said, because apparently the church had this really ugly, like 1970s architecture, and then Father shows up and just redesigns the whole thing and makes it into this beautiful, it was almost like, I don't know, it was like neo-Romanesque or something. It was just really beautiful church with the stained glass windows, the painting, and the altar had this beautiful sculpture of the Da Vinci scene. It was really gorgeous church.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, I have a series of questions that I submitted to all of you. And so I think it'll cover a lot of kind of what we want to say about the conference. So the first question, so what were your overall impressions of the conference? Was there something that differed from your expectations? Were the fears/critiques of those antagonistic to the conference justified? And so start with Andrew and your thoughts there.
Yeah, definitely. Did David and Jeremiah, did you get that quote from that one podcast episode by Eric Sammons that I sent you?
No.
Yes.
I probably did.
Get a chance to look at that. Yeah, it's funny. I actually just stumbled across that today, and it was funny to read that now post-conference, after the conference, has come about, and having gotten to listen to the talks that Sister Mary Eucharista gave, and Dom, Dom here. Eric Salmon said that it was a silly conference with silly speakers that would be about absolutely nothing, and that's what he said in this podcast, and that was definitely not the case. It was definitely not a great big nothing burger, which they thought that it was going to be. As a matter of fact, I came away incredibly inspired and enriched from that weekend. It was anything but that. If anything, I would say it increased my knowledge of God and of the church, of the human person, and our relationship to God and to each other, and it was really good. It was really, really good.
Great. Jeremiah,
something that differed from my expectations would be that I was really hoping that some of the critics, especially the harshest ones, because they make money, this is their business, that they would have done the gentlemanly thing and come in a gentlemanly manner. I'm glad in the hindsight, it is what it is, and it's the most amazing conference. It was so amazing, and it would be much different if they were there. However, apart from Kyle Whittington, and a big round of applause for him too. Kyle Whittington came, he was interviewing people, trying to find out, what are they really about? What is this thing? Why are they all coming together from various parts of the country and in another country, right? People are coming. And so I wish that that would have been different. But I want to echo what Andrew said. The presentations were so wonderful. They were worthy of taking notes. Of course, I do anyway. But I'm sitting there just scribbling notes down, trying my best because, and even the way that Andrew kind of laid it out, the various different parts of our experience that it touched on, and it was remarkable. And I felt that the role, the fact that we had Father Gilbaugh there, that he was as active and involved as he was, the fact that this is better than expectation, okay, that David would help and that he would take part in the prayers when we would do Liturgy of the Hours, that he would, the various prayers throughout the day, he was part of the leadership of that. And it was so awesome to see the reverence by which he prayed and the reverence by which all of us prayed there and the way that we communed together. And so, yeah, that's the one thing that was, I wish was a little different. But other than that, I have zero complaints about it at all.
Dom?
Yeah. When it comes to saying that this conference is silly or about nothing, what really struck me about the conference was the atmosphere. I talked, there was about 40 people that attended.
70.
Many who
70.
Laura told me
Oh
it was
my.
70 in total. Yeah,
Yeah,
from two countries. Yeah, U.S. and Canada.
yeah.
Oh wow.
Represented. Yeah, David.
Dang, it looked like less. That's incredible.
I know. Yeah.
40 feels like a lot already to me, but yeah, 70.
Well, part of the reason was because there were so many family people. And so there were people downstairs, outside talking. And so a lot of times they weren't all in the church at the same time. But no, it was a remarkable showing.
That makes sense. Yeah. No. Yeah. And I also, the age range was as honestly as I expected, which is, people ranging from their 40s to their 60s, and I think there was a couple that might have been even older than that. And I'm bringing that up because the expectations, I think people are not aware of what this was, and the amount of stories I've heard and the talking to these people and telling them that they've felt isolated for decades, and you could see a lot of pain on the face of people that is not manufactured. PTSD was definitely something I noticed, and so I'm not trying to I don't know, be like hyperbolic here, but the fact of the matter is, some of these, one person said that joining the CMRI was a step towards sanity. And I'm laughing not because it's funny, but because that's how crazy, unfortunately, a lot of people have grown up in these very secluded sedevacantist communities or SSPX resistance and have been pounded with this resentment for decades. They've grown up with it, and there's there was some serious issues, like wounds that were very visible, and it was honestly for me a little overwhelming, if I'm going to be honest. I wasn't prepared. I knew I knew speculatively like what I was expecting, but I don't think it hit me until I was there, the kind of thing that this is. And so a lot of them, found their way back to the church through the Fraternity of St. Peter or the Institute Christ the King or Nova Sordo Parish, and so I think that it was just completely off the mark, the response that this conference got. And like I say is agreements or heck, even if you're still a sedevacantist or something, there's no reason to attack these poor people who have had very real experiences, very horrible experiences. Like there are victims in all kinds of communities, Protestants, Anglican, Orthodox, Catholic. It's just the nature of wide demographics is that you have people who end up in places with people. Heck, the Catholic Church has a sex abuse that everyone knows of. Okay, and we all know here that there are some sex abuse problems in the society, in the fraternity, Father Jackson, among others. This is a problem. It's not here to bash. It's not an excuse, like an argument, right? But it's simply us realizing that when there's people that have been hurt unjustly, the duty of a Christian is to minister, and if it so be it. Duty to minister to people who have been hurt by people who claim religious authority over them. Just imagine the kind of manipulation that is possible in a dynamic like that. Come on. Anyway, we'll talk probably about the anyway. That's all I got right now.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, to share some of my own thoughts, on that point, I think that was what made this conference quite unique from many other Catholic conferences that I've been to, where the content of the conference itself, the speeches, almost seem to be secondary to the occasion to build community with others who went through similar traumatizing experiences. And I think what this conference did was dispel, I think, this common criticism of the reality of the conference itself in the months leading up, that there is nothing wrong with traditionalism.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with these groups. These groups are perfectly fine and healthy, and in fact well ordered, because they recognize some problem in the church, et cetera, when in fact the common sentiment that I heard when talking to a lot of the attendees was, I left my Sedevacantis group, or I left the SSPX, and when I started attending a Novus Ordo parish, or something like the fraternity, when I shared my experiences, people had no conception of what I was talking about. And that only prolonged the difficulty of integration within the broader Catholic community. So it was really heartening to see a lot of families, a lot of people exchanging contact information so that they can continue the process of healing moving forward. Another thing that really struck me with this conference was the particular liturgical emphasis that we had with praying the Liturgy of the Hours and the Mass. But I think taking the best of what our experiences were in our exposure to, the Missal of John the 23rd, and really wanting to give a reverent effort in the way that we prayed. We really took our time with the Liturgy of the Hours, and we were very clear in our pronunciation, and I'm tooting my own horn, if I will. But I was really impressed with and really edified with how Father Gilbaugh celebrated Mass, and to let everyone know, we did the Missal of Pope Paul VI in Latin, at least the ordinary parts of it in Latin, and it was beautiful. But I think the most beautiful takeaway, and I'm trying to adopt this myself now, this has been my homework since I returned, was Father Gilbaugh memorized the entire Roman canon. He memorized Eucharistic Prayer 1. And it was beautiful seeing him in the Orans position and his eyes closed. And it really gave the impression that he was truly meditating and praying on the words of the Roman canon.
Yes.
So much so that I've challenged myself and the other guys at the seminary for my diocese to try to memorize Eucharistic Prayer 1 before we go back in a couple weeks' time. And so I'm a few paragraphs in already, but it's already been a wonderful meditative exercise for me in truly praying with the words of the liturgy. So
nice.
That received top marks for me in the weekend, was the beauty and the reverence of our liturgy, and really showing that there is a continuity in the liturgy, that it is a truly traditional liturgy, and that it continues with what the church has fostered and shaped over the course of time.
And he gladly obeyed.
And he gladly obeyed.
He gladly obeyed. It was such an amazing moment, if you think about it, because here he is wanting to do the Mass, and he let everybody know. He said he wanted to do the Mass in Latin. He believes they all should, in Ad Orientem. But the bishop had instructed him that he wasn't permitted to do all of those things, but rather, as David described it. And before the Mass, he told us all this. And he said, and I will gladly obey. And I thought, and I said, what a powerful moment. because that's what it's all about. There's no rival altar here, right? We have St. Ignatius, his certificate, right, that recognizes from the bishop the altar that is being celebrated upon, and that the sacrifice of the mass is being acted upon. And so, yeah, it was it
Can
was
I
a
add,
powerful moment.
Jeremiah?
Yes. Yeah.
I just wanted to add that I noticed that there was an initial reticence to clap after the first talk because it was in a church, and of course, a lot of dresses and veils, and I think Father opened up saying what he said precisely. I think he was afraid of scandalizing people. My point ultimately is that this was in fact probably too traditional for some.
Yeah.
um, I'm being a little facetious, but yeah. So that's all I had to add.
Yeah. Well, I also was deeply impressed too, uh, piggybacking on David's point about how the liturgy of both the Eucharist and of the hours, the divine office, were interspersed throughout our day, and the talks, and it was beautiful to see these common threads and themes that we were seeing in each of the talks, also in the prayers that we were saying. I mean, it was very, very moving, and how they both were informing each other. Both the content of the liturgy was informing the talks and the speakers, who would often make adjustments based off of how we prayed, or just recognizing in the prayers themselves the themes we were talking about. And I think that's such a beautiful sign of God's presence. Where two or three are gathered in my name, there I am with you. It was a wonderful sign of that. And also, what else was I going to say? Oh, I know there's a lot of emphasis, and of course, it was a main part of the conference. People who have been personally injured or suffered different kinds of abuse. Of course, that was an aspect of this conference.
Yeah.
But of course, it definitely wasn't the only aspect. Many
Yes.
people have gotten the impression that's what this is about, and that's not the case, because of course, as has been pointed out, you can experience abuse in any kind of Christian community, and or religious community, anywhere where there are people, you're going to get abusive situations. And so I think it's really important to highlight the fact that we weren't just there to talk about personal abuse. We were also there to talk about abuse of the church, abuse of
Yes.
her liturgy, and abuse of the things that are holy, abuse of the truth, a falsification of the church's ideas and the things she said about herself, to prop up a certain ideology or a certain movement. Because
Yeah,
of
her
course,
council and
yeah,
her liturgical books, and also progressivism and all of the whole spectrum, right? But and coming from our experience, where the rejection of the council comes from the right, to use an unhelpful term, right?
yes. Yeah, exactly. So it wasn't the point of Trad Recovery is not just a matter of helping people to recover personally or individually, which is a huge part of it, but also helping them to recover their relationship with the church, and to really reintegrate fully as Catholics when they're coming from many schismatic and unhealthy independent communities. Like that I feel like is one of the central things that has to be emphasized over and over again. This conference is about. It's not just about some kind of, we think traditionalism is disease and all the priests in there are abusive priests and people are just coming together to whine and talk about their experiences. That wasn't it at all. And I think the talks and conferences really showed that, because they emphasized a kind of reintegration and being informed in our faith. And really, again, the theme of the conference was Catholics in communion. And that's really was the crux, I think, of our gathering.
Yeah. And I want to emphasize too, I didn't get the impression, listening to the various speeches, that the role of being hurt, right? The role of any kind of unfortunate thing. The speeches were really, a lot of them were establishing terms and establishing lines and saying, this conference has an offensive momentum to it. It's not purely like it drawn in this very private relational thing. Although I think that's where most of that happened. That's where the kinds of conversations that took place. And after the conference, where we'd go outside and we'd eat and sit around, just talk with each other, drink and cigars, whole 9 yards. That it was in those times outside the conference that you really started to hear more about personal stories. But a lot of and people will find this out when it's made available, that a lot of these speeches were apologetic in nature. They were. It was marvelous. In fact, the entire thing, I think, is a marvelous display of everyday apologetics. And I think that people will walk away not just encouraged and like that somebody got to hear from their heart and they could relate to people, but walking with an optimism now, an optimism that says we're on the right side of this. It's evident now. If it wasn't evident before, the world's going to witness a huge, massive contrast to the way it was portrayed and what actually took place. And I don't think that if they say, well, but there's still a lot of touchy-feely stuff everybody's talking about right now, and you go, because it's actually relational too. And that is the consequence of this, that if it's a single thread, that's why, I didn't mind the name of the conference or the name of Laura's apostolate, was that there's kind of this common thread, but to be able to move forward, I think was really the primary direction that the presenters kind of postured themselves, and they did it successfully.
Yeah.
Except me.
Go ahead, Dave.
Well, yeah, I guess I wanted to say that were the fears of those antagonistic to the conference, merited? I think they have a right. Well, not in the way that they thought. So it wasn't a silly conference, but they really should be afraid, because the apologetics material that was presented was bombastic and surefire, and as we say time and again, you can't run around Matthew 18. You have to confront it. So I think that leads into question 2 pretty well, unless Dom, you wanted to speak one last thing.
Is that the question about the term?
No, but if you want to address that.
Well, I just wanted to say really quickly, I'm not here to change, any kind of name or for, I don't want, everyone to agree with me. All I want to say is that I have had several people reach out to me saying that they would love to support this, but they don't think that they can because of the name. And maybe, I think that you still should be able to support this. The fact of the matter is that, when the church began the Ecclesia Dei Commission, which continues to exist under the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith, traditional Catholics who understand themselves as traditional Catholics have been welcomed into the church, and of course the requirement was that they accept the council. This is kind of the story of the Fraternity of St. Peter. And the Institute of Christ the King is its own kind of thing. It didn't start from the messy history of the society. And these people accept the council and call themselves traditional Catholic. Some people might say, well, maybe they shouldn't, but the fact of the matter is they do. And many, I know many of them, some are family members, some are friends. And as for myself, I think that to follow my conscience would be to make this distinction that not all, that people can be traditional Catholic and be in communion with the church. I'm not going after those people. And I think there is a confusion that exists, and that some people feel targeted, but it's really about groups that are cut off from the church so that they might be reintegrated into the church. A lot of the people that were there were reintegrated by coming into the Fraternity of St. Peter. And I think that misunderstanding is part of the fighting and the division. And I'm a peaceful kind of reconciliation guy. And I just want to keep those family members and friends in mind, because they do accept the council and I don't have them in mind. And I won't use the term, but I'm not here to change anyone else's mind. So I like the term Lefebvrist. That's me. I just wanted to say that because, my conscience compels me to. That's all.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that too, the TradRecovery name really, I think, was inspired by Pope St. John Paul II's Ecclesia Dei, which the spirit of that was to recover trads, to reintegrate trads into the fullness of the church.
If only they saw it that way. Yeah.
If only they saw it that way,
Yeah.
exactly. And I think, again, the reason certain people take issue with it, again, is because I think it displays a kind of a rigorous attachment to traditionalism itself. Rather than having it be something that supports your faith, it becomes the foundation of your faith. And that's when you kind of get the order of things flipped upside down. It's almost like if somebody was a charismatic Catholic, right? They're charismatic before they're Catholic, right? So, and we saw that in many of these rebellious groups, right? Where they would actually begin disobeying the bishop or come into conflict with their bishop. They were people who put their charismatic spirituality and way of being Catholic over and above being Catholic. And so, of course, they're the people who would become very upset. Say, for example, traditionalists love to criticize and go after the charismatic movement, and they dish it out very, very freely. But as soon as somebody does the same thing to the traditionalist movement, all of a sudden, what they've been doing to the charismatic movement, that can't be done to them now. So it really is kind of a double standard, you might say. But I think it's really just a matter of, for people who are honest and want to look into, again, the definition of terms, trad recovery, it's just shorthand for people who come from extreme traditionalist, radical traditionalist, schismatic traditionalist groups, to help them reintegrate into the church, to help them personally, to help them in their spiritual life. That is truly the spirit. And I think it really shows a kind of small-mindedness to become too obsessed with the terms that are being used, because you could do that to anything and to anybody. And I brought this up in my defense of the TradRecovery Apostolate. I could, if I was an Eastern Catholic, I could totally take offense to the Mass of the Ages documentary and its title, because it seems to display that kind of what is the term for that, where the Roman Rite
Triumphalism.
Triumphalism. Thank you. That the Roman Rite is the supreme rite of all rites. It's the Mass of the Ages, and the Byzantine Rite and the Ambrosian Rite and the Mozarabic Rite, the Ukrainian Catholic Rite. They all play second fiddle. I mean, you could misunderstand it in that way, or you could see what those people who are making that Mass of the Ages documentary are trying to say, and accept the terms, even if you might not necessarily like the terms they use the best. At least then you understand what they're trying to say.
Can I add something positive on top of that?
Yeah.
I found that the name actually was able to reach to certain people that it would not have reached, because those people, one story that showed up during the conference when I talked to several people is that when they were younger, if they were asked if they were Catholic, they would say no, right? That no, I'm a traditional Catholic, and that meant that they're not conciliar Catholics. So that title was able to reach certain people that would otherwise maybe not have been reached. That being said, demographics and groups is one thing, but people and persons and interaction is another. And I know too many people who are not like the demographic, and so that's why I think there's a lot of people that have reached out to me saying, I'd like to support this, but doesn't look good, is what they tell me. Again, I'm not here to change people's minds. So I'm just saying that it has done good things because of the name, actually. So I want to affirm that.
Sure.
I still think that part of the backlash is a little bit of misunderstanding because of the name as well. That's all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's just to be expected in any human endeavor or interaction. You're going to have misunderstandings. You're going to have people who, I feel like that's just kind of part of being people. I mean, look at Christ. I mean, he was, as clear as he could possibly be, right? I mean, he was a perfect person, but he was constantly misunderstood. And sometimes, that's just the nature of human language and ambiguity. And sometimes it's in the hearers themselves who don't want to understand. So I think that I think it's just kind of part of the process. And I think the more people are exposed to it, and if they are of goodwill, they're going to be able to look into it and see, okay, this isn't maybe what I thought it was before. But yeah, no, I agree with you, Dom. I don't think that we should necessarily, it's not about saying this is the hill I'm going to die on. We're not trying to put us versus
we don't need
them.
to be so offensive.
Yeah. It's not about being offensive. It's about helping people. That's the spirit.
Offensive. I didn't mean offensive.
Yes,
offensive.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I mean, and that's the spirit of this whole thing is taking care of people who need it.
Jeremiah, thoughts? You've been very quiet and a good boy.
Yes, I have. No, I'll just propose with the quandary as I see it, and that is that it's an effort that would have to do a number of things that will take a long time, and it's also there'd be a lot of people, like when people describe themselves as traditionalists and they say, well, the Pope, and when he's kind of coming off maybe as impersonal or he's not caring very much, and that's the way they talk about that. I think that it's difficult because the Pope is left with very few alternatives to figure out where individual people are. And that's why it may work out really well as to be more particular with Lefebvre if you're talking with someone who is admittedly an all-in kind of guy. Like if you're talking about Kennedy Hall, easily. But I know that Tim Flanders would reject that label, for example, and it would not apply, but yet trad would apply to him. In fact, I think Dr. K would say, well, I support him and it's fine, but I'm not a Lefebvreite. I don't know if he would use the term. And so I think that we would not only have to kind of birth it, but then convince people of it, and then figure out how do we divide the people who are crazy, to be frank, the people who say blasphemous things and are just brazenly schismatic. Like I saw a post, I can't even believe my eyes, about a priest going up to somebody and asking if he would be allowed to do the Latin Mass, even without the bishop's permission, and that he could do it privately. The person that was asked gave the individual a copy of True Disobedience by Dr. Peter Kwasniewski. And I thought to myself, wow, like that group is recognized as traditionalist. So if somebody says, well, I'm not like that, then you have to say, well, the only way we can really know in big, larger groups and things like that, organisms, would be their buying power. What do they buy? What do they consume? Who are the biggest names in traditionalism? And I'm sorry, it's not people writing a bunch of magazines. It's people who are online. It's people who are on Twitter. It's people who are saying scandalous things every single day. Just wildly blasphemous. And so when the Pope or anyone looks at it and says, well, this is what traditionalism appears as it bubbles up and forms into organisms that can be perceived in large structures, that these are the people running the show, and it's looking really, really, really just deadly rotten. And so that when a person doesn't says, well, I don't identify with all that, I say, this is actually the dilemma. This is the debate, is where are we coming to terms? And I like how this is even a debate in our group because that is what this is. We're coming to terms, and it's spooking a lot of the trads because the people who don't identify that way and that we would say are otherwise great people, right? We would not call them mad trads or bad trads or sad trads. We wouldn't do that. They wouldn't qualify. But that's an internal problem that they have to deal with. And all we can do is say, well, this is what they call themselves. But yet these other people that call themselves say the most outrageous things. And maybe they disagree, but nobody at a larger place like the Pope, especially the Pope, could work and operate realistically on a case-by-case thing. And so I stick with the name, generally speaking. And if a person doesn't identify, I say, well, you may have a different name, but this is the name that the majority of the purchase power that signifies what people consume and what they watch. It's the best term I think we've got.
Yeah. So maybe if I could just say one last thing is
Yeah.
that, and I don't want to belabor this point.
Zip. Yeah. I'll zip it. Yeah. Yeah.
I guess I'm thinking of the speech that Cardinal Ratzinger gave in, I think it was Chile, on about the consecrations of Lefebvre in
Yes.
1988. And he spoke of the fact that a lot of people were attracted to the movement of Monsignor Lefebvre, a lot of young people. And he also made mention of the fact that in the church's past, right, oftentimes when division and ultimately schism and breaking off of ecclesial communities or churches or groups, right, takes place, we often look back and think, the church could have done more there. And that's just what I want to keep in mind, which is that, a spirit of humility, which is, maybe we can win some people over to remain in the bark of Peter. Sure, it has problems. And sometimes, the storm is violent, right? But it is the bark of Peter, and it's the one that's the safe place where my feet are planted for the rest of my life, right? And so I don't know. That's all I wanted to add. I want to belabor the point, but I think so. Oftentimes the church could do more. Is all I would say.
Well, and that's why you and I, Dom, I mean, on your channel and the couple episodes where you and I kind of really dove into this topic about the traditional Catholic movement. I mean, the central thrust of what you and I were talking about was, let's help rehabilitate and retake the traditional Catholic movement back for Catholicism, reorient it into the heart of the church. Because, of course, the traditional movement as it was back then and as it is now are two completely different things, right? I mean, decades have lapsed now, and back then you didn't have Vigano, you didn't have the Coalition of Canceled Priests, you didn't have all these new pockets of resistance that have come up and as a result of Pope Francis's pontificate. So we are kind of seeing a new thing, but I agree with you, Dom. I agree with you. I think we need to be, like Pope Francis says, we need to help accompany traditional Catholics, so that they can feel that there's a place in the church for them.
Yes, that's it.
I want to cite something in agreement. I mentioned it before to self-promotion, I guess, but 1 Peter 5, when I wrote about sedevacantism, I said this, and it's to play into the idea that sometimes the church could do better. If Monsignor Ronald Knox is correct, as I contend he is, then, quote, there is a recurrent situation in church history, using the word church in the widest sense, where an excess of charity threatens unity. It's the classic double-edged sword of otherwise good folks taking an otherwise pious proposition or practice a tad too far. To his great merit, Knox goes to great pains in his 591-page magnum opus, Enthusiasm, a chapter in the history of the church, to show how often this cuts both ways. More and more, quote, this is a quote from him, more and more, by a kind of fatality, you see the enthusiasts draw apart from their co-religionists, a hive ready to swarm. Sadly, subsequent provocations occur, quote, on the one part, cheap jokes at the expense of overgodliness, acts of stupid repression by unsympathetic authorities. On the other, contempt of the half-Christian, ominous references to old wine in new bottles, to the kernel and the husk. Then, while you hold your breath and turn away your eyes in fear, the break comes. Condemnation or secession, what difference does it make? A fresh name has been added to the list of Christianities, and this is my final word on it, was that it's as if the only thing both sides could agree on was that the stroll towards schism should be supercharged into a full-blown arms race, transforming disagreements into divisions and divisions into all-out war.
Very good.
Thank you. That's a good quote.
Yeah.
So I think as the apostolate continues to grow out of its diapers and into, solid food and all that, as the apostolate grows and the content that we put out there continues to grow, and soon enough, the speeches from the conference will speak for themselves. It'll be evident who we're talking about and what issues we're talking about. And so I think as it moves on, the problems will resolve itself. Before I preface, or before I get into the next question, I wanted to extend Laura's regrets. She was invited to join us tonight. However, her loving husband took her out on a date tonight. So we hope that they, as spouses, have a wonderful time on their date. And we'll hear from her soon enough. The next question I wanted to ask each of you speakers was, I guess, to give a short summary of what your speech topics were and why you felt it was important to speak on those particular topics. So I'll pass it to Andrew to start us off.
Do I keep having to go first because my name starts with an A?
Yeah. Yes.
But if it was my last, if it's my
class.
last name, if it's my last name, I'm the BAN. You're after me, man.
Oh yes, yeah, that's right.
I was always like first or second anytime class, the roll was being called.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, the name Andrew was the first called, so I guess it's my fate.
Yeah.
Anyway, so my two topics were on the subject of ecclesiology of the church, because I really, me and along with my friend and colleague John Salza, as we've spoken many times on this subject, it really is the central error of the extreme and schismatic traditionalist part of the traditionalist movement, is this false conception of what the church is. And so for me, for both of my talks were themed in coming to terms with what is the church, and how can we, by what way can we know for sure how to find her? Because if she is indeed the pillar and foundation of truth, as the scriptures tell us in 1 Timothy 3:15, and that Christ promised in John chapter 16 verse 13 that he would lead the church into all truth, how can we find this foundation of truth? Because if we can find this context, this perfect self-contained system or organism that Christ has given to us, that leads us, births us into the spiritual life, and into the kingdom of heaven. What are the ways that we can know for sure? Because they need to be simple, they need to be certain, and they need to be divinely guaranteed, because outside of the Catholic Church, there's no salvation. This is truly the road and the means which Christ has established in order to draw all creation back to himself. And so my first talk, which was on the motherhood of the church, it was focused on what are the marks of the church, her external properties, what are her attributes, and where do we get those? How do we know that those are supposed to be a part of the way that she was divinely constituted by her founder? How can we know that, and how can we then apply them in order to find our mother, to find the spiritual source of the divine life that's within us? And then my second talk, which was knowing the truth on the 8 rules of faith according to St. Francis of Sales, dealt with the various organs, you might say, of the body by which the church communicates her truth to us, how we know what is to be true. It's the Word of God, Scripture, and tradition, and then the application and explanation of the Word of God in the church, in the councils, in the fathers of the church, in the Holy Father. These means by which the church, either collectively or in her special and noble parts, is able to help us to not fall into error when it comes to our reception and understanding of the faith. Because as St. Paul says, how can the faith comes by what is heard? There must be this preacher, this magisterium, this mother teacher figure who's able to, like Philip the apostle, and the Ethiopian eunuch who is struggling to understand the received deposit can come in and explain and help us to apply and know truly is what that means. And then, of course, there were a couple other rules of faith that are complementary that I got into as well. But if you want to learn about those, you'll have to listen to the talks.
Yes, awesome. Jeremiah, you had some related topics to Andrew, so I'll pass you the mic next.
Yeah. So my two, and the first one, I lost my notes. I got just totally upset. And this is what I said earlier, how there was one kind of hiccup. And it was weird because I'm normally just a pumped up guy. You know, I get up there, I'm a lively guy. But I couldn't find it. My family was at Subway and they were coming. And I'm like, are they going to be here? You know, we drove all the way out here. And so I kind of got a little bit frustrated, and I went up and did the speech. But I didn't nail it the way I wanted. I wanted to talk about the new lexicon, essentially, and how prodigal children are transforming the whole, redefining, in fact, the crisis. And these words that have emerged, some of them humorous in origin, but deadly serious in force. And we talked about, and when we're talking about the Silesian argument, we use words like invincible, inevitable, inescapable, that these things are, because it's a transcendental thing. The argument for it is. And so, but terms like suspicionista, someone who suspects that the Pope might be guilty of heresy, and so he's out. The monocle man, and I don't know where my monocle is. I'm actually kind of upset about it. I'm like, where's my monocle? But we joke on the show and talk about going to the ancient scrolls. You're proof diving, you're quote mining. You're trying to find things that justify this thing you already have, and it's all up to you. It's all up to you. You know, I can't trust Rome, but I can trust your Twitter account, buddy. And so monocle men, the ancient scrolls, right? Enthusiasm, the nature of enthusiasm. I won't say too much about it because I just finished editing it for the compilation, the collector set that I'm working on, not only for that, but for Jake Fowler's Canon 211 series on the ecumenical councils. But things like Martin Lutheritis, and I just had to say that, at least the last one. Martin Lutheritis, because it gets people really upset. They get very rankled about it. And they're constantly, I almost think sometimes it's on purpose, that it kind of softens the blow. You know, if they redirect it and say, well, the chocolate Martin Luther and, you know, in the Vatican, or the red Martin Luther, whatever that was. And they'll try to diverge this stuff. And you say, yeah, but you're saying things like the church is contradicted, the councils have contradicted, the popes have contradicted, and all of these things. And that unless you and your conscience, right, and your understanding as you've conventionally accepted or come up with, doesn't matter, that you accept that instead of Rome. And so that was what it was, in saying these help to provide lenses whereby people can see a tendency within somebody, and you can hear the echo of those heresies in the words that they say. You can hear it because it's present. And it's tremendously tragic, but they don't like the fact that it's being redefined. But more than those words that came from the show, and did I touch on all of them, Dom? What's the one that made you chuckled during? You said you particularly liked that part.
Yeah, I can't remember what specific term, but I loved the lexicon.
The
I
lexicon.
thought that was great.
But here's the other part of that, and this is the first speech, that you guys put the four of us back up, man. Look, because this right here, look, we're part of that lexicon. We are, because of our testimony and by the blood of the Lamb, that people are getting to know where we're coming from, the arguments that are coalescing together. It's a powerful thing to behold, in fact. And I dare say that it was something, it's something, you know, people can get on my case and say, oh, this guy. But I talked to Andrew and I said, Andrew, you know, this was a prophetic thing, that it was St. Francis de Sales who believed that one day, he hoped that from those exercises or those studies that turned into what we now call Catholic controversy, that they would be used to provide and give birth kind of to a method of holy preaching that is applicable to all heretics, right? All schismatics, almost all equally everywhere. And yes, and so to do that, and that was the first one. And that the people is not just the words, but more importantly, the people and the stories and the conversations, that relational, deep, real dynamic. But that plays into the second one, which I used our story from She Danced Me a Story. This book right here. It's all, in fact, I used the same one. So I decided on the fly, it was actually lunchtime, because I was going to do just describing the debate that St. Francis de Sales had and the kind of arguments that he used and how to develop them, how to work them out, what it means. And I thought, I can do that. I've done it a bazillion times. I said, but I haven't actually seen how did it affect my coming back as a prodigal child? Because it was the arguments in that were things that fleshed themselves out similarly in my book, even though I was an atheist. And I advanced the argument, at least, made people aware of the idea that, according to my man Orestes Brownson, that these arguments, that they work almost equally, not only for the schismatics of any shade and hue, but also for the unbeliever, flat out unbeliever, and the method, right? The way this is done. And so it was a pretty bold claim to say I would argue with a Protestant, a traditionalist, and an atheist almost entirely the same. And I demonstrated it by showing how the book affected even the secular way that we think about morality and things like that, and say, how do we come to this? And so to show who built the builders, right? And to me, I tied it in. I should have done better about this part, to tie it in and to demonstrate the idea of succession, and to say apostolic succession, that you're going to be able to show who built the builders of the church, who built them. And it goes all the way back to our Lord who assures it. And so I was trying to show how his argument played in beautifully to the inner thoughts and things that I was working through, even as an unbelieving father, a prodigal son who lost his 12-year-old daughter to brain cancer. And so I'm going to create an even better one, because I did it on the fly. I was like, I'm pulling papers out of the book. It's like all marked up and terrible. It's like they're not even in the book anymore. I tore them all out. So I have to get a new one. But to put together this idea, and the last thing, and this is really short because it's not developed, is the fittingness of it. That it was fitting to use a similar argument as we used for Our Lady, and why our Lord preserved her in that manner, and that the church as his bride, that he takes the honor and dishonor given to the bride, that he ensures that he guides the steps, and that publicly around the world we can trust with a simple and childlike faith that we believe all these things that the Catholic Church teaches, not because we're, the chariots and horsemen of our own mind. That was another one. Not because the chariots and horsemen of our own mind, but because he can neither deceive nor be deceived. And that's why we trust it. We don't need to go like the person who shared Dr. Peter Kwasniewski's book with that priest. Lord help that man. But yeah, I hope that's the topic, the gist of the second one. And you'll hear more, of course, when the podcasts come out.
Right.
MP3.
Dom, your talks.
Yeah.
Very different. You didn't really touch much on Francis de Sales. You took a different route.
I didn't. And I did notice that the theme of St. Francis de Sales came out as a thread through the conference. And I just wanted to say, I love St. Francis de Sales so much. When I was younger, I read his Treatise on the Love of God. It's a 2-volume work of his. It's his most technical and spiritual work. And I just remember that being a watershed moment on my journey, my faith journey, right? Which is encountering this kind of profoundly spiritual and profoundly scriptural theology, and also, he's a kind of post-Tridentine scholastic, and some of those get a bad rap in some circles, but he has always appealed to me. But anyway, I just wanted to praise the great doctor, St. Francis de Sales. He's a little overshadowed, unfortunately. And he definitely showed up as a patron saint that we did not choose. He kind of chose us, you know. And I love the lexicon, Jeremiah. I just think that's not only the words, the words you choose are they're funny, but the best thing is that they're practical, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of people, a lot of Catholics, they don't have time to, as you put it, go through the scrolls, right, with the monocle, right? But what they can seize upon and use on a daily basis is terms that encapsulate something they should look out for. So that's what I really liked about your first talk. I know I'm talking about your guys' talks, but I just had to get in there what I liked about your guys'
Well,
talks.
thank you. Yeah.
But Andrew, you know, when you quoted de Lubac in the first talk, I mean, you already won me over, you know. But I really loved your second talk because of the themes of the rules of faith and the relationship between scripture and tradition from St. Francis de Sales, which is amazing the way he unfolds that, and you know, scripture, tradition, and church, and that's something that I'm particularly interested in. So I love that. But my first talk was called Tradition, Communion, and Joy, and it was about the relationship of the Second Vatican Council to our time, the atmospheres surrounding the council, as well as the nature of tradition. And I'm taking most of everything I spoke of was taken from Ratzinger, as well as the nature of joy. In fact, I quoted Ratzinger to say that the nature of Catholicism is itself joy. Catholicism is joy. I mean, that's how it begins, right? Kyrie, right? Rejoice, favored one, or full of grace, right? The Lord is in your midst. And that's the thing, is that the Lord is in the midst of the woman, right? Of the church. And communion with the church is the only place where true joy resides. And I do think there was a crisis in joy that Friedrich Nietzsche seized upon that contributed to the post-conciliar chaos. And that was something I drew out in my first talk. But there was a lot more to that. It was a much more personal and pastoral talk that was catered towards the particular audience. And I do want to say, man, I just feel the spiritual kinship with a lot of the people there after talking to them. It was kind of yeah, it's hard to describe. It's just this you know, you relate to experiences, you understand where they're coming from, and you want to share with them what I've discovered in Ratzinger. Anyway, my second talk was on the liturgy. Laura called me at one point. She's like, Dom, could you give a second talk? I'm like, well, I'd love to. You know me, I love to share stuff. And she's like, okay, can you do what Ratzinger thought of the Novus Ordo? I'm like, seriously? I was like, oh man. So I had to dig through the scrolls, as Jeremiah says, right? But guess what I did? I digged through everything, and I'm actually continuing because I find this so interesting. But I gave a talk on the reform of the liturgy and the theology of Joseph Ratzinger, and what I uncovered was not what is popular, right? A lot of times Ratzinger is cited in various ways to support various agendas. But when I went through, I think everything he's written on the liturgy, at least in English, I'm sure I missed something. What emerged was actually a very beautiful and profound theology of the liturgy that has the church very much at the center. So I'll probably make that talk public in the near future, and I'm going to be talking more about liturgy. But that was my two talks, and it was great. And I loved Sister Mary Eucharistia's
Yes.
first talk, especially. I thought that was really good. Yeah.
So good.
Yes,
Yes.
I was going to have Laura speak on it, but I'll kind of touch on Sister Eucharista and Father Gilbaugh.
Okay.
So Sister Mary Eucharista on the first night spoke about human formation in the spiritual life, about healing from spiritual abuse. And she has such a joyful disposition.
Yeah.
And the crux of her argument was really focused on how good it is to be in the fullness of church, and that it's okay to admit when we're wrong. But when we admit that we're wrong, to say that joyfully we come into what is right. And so yeah, she talked about, in fact, like this was really beautiful. She gave the etymology of reconciliation with the sacrament. It's re concilia, to be with eyelash. So to be eyelash to eyelash with God is sort of the literal translation of reconciliation.
Yeah, come on now.
which speaks of the sacrament, but it also speaks of that what it feels like to come back into the fullness of communion with the church, to have that deep-seated intimacy where you feel like you're really within the bosom of Abraham. So it was really beautiful. She spoke very highly of Dr. Peter Malinowski, Indianapolis-based psychologist who works with human formation with priests and seminarians. She spoke on the John Paul II's document, which I attend a seminary that's run by the Sulpicians, and they love to brag that this document was ghost written by the Sulpicians, but it's called Pastores Davo Bovis. I will give you shepherds, and it talks about the different dimensions of formation for seminarians, but for the Catholic populace as a whole. And then she spoke about more deeply about human formation, saying that the journey of journey to freedom begins with self-knowledge, understanding what it is that we've gone through, our wounds, but our strengths too, and seeing how those can be brought to the fore, to really come to know ourselves, and then to assess ourselves within the fullness of truth. And this was a quote that ran throughout the entirety of the conference after she said it, but relationship precedes identity. And that was powerful. And each of the speakers took those three words and integrated it into sort of giving a dimension through each of their own topics. And with that, she spoke about the importance to live in communion with real people, and how a common trap is, with modern traditionalism, is to fall within these internet silos. But when we really come into authentic communion with real persons in the deep real, as we like to say, you see that you have more similarities than differences, and you're less likely to be antagonistic, and more so to focus on being in communion. So that was excellent. On the second day, Father Gilbaugh spoke on his pastoral observations of the radical traditionalist, and this was almost surgical-like in its precision.
Yeah.
In which he didn't provide a superficial or a stereotypical kind of character sketch, but his observations over decades of observations, and in his interactions with radical traditionalists, of what are the common traits that people who fall into the traditionalist error tend to imbibe. Not to give all of them away, but he spoke on some tendencies were tendencies towards a sort of simplistic and naive faith, an obsession with scandal, a focus on hypocrisy, that the personality types tend to be very passionate. So he provided all these great sort of characteristics that he saw throughout his years of pastoral work. And what was interesting was many of us in the pew, as he was saying these things, a lot of us were nodding along, being like, yes, cool, I've been there, done that. So it was excellent, and it was really insightful as far as, I guess, giving a more concrete understanding of what it is about perhaps a personal disposition or an internal disposition that can lead one into error. And Sister Eucharista's second talk was entitled Unfathomable Mercy in the Face of Human Logic and Sin. So she really spoke on the nature of mercy and how to understand God's mercy in the face of us having made mistakes in the spiritual life. So she quoted St. Paul in when she said, power is made perfect in weakness. She spoke about different pathologies that are often common within radical traditionalism, such as, like an addiction to being right, an overfixation on certain things within theology to dispute other counterbalances that occur in the history of the church and her teaching. She spoke on humility. She gave a really nice definition that I have in my notes. She said, humility is not thinking less of ourselves, but thinking about ourselves less, which was really beautiful. She spoke on the different attributes of God's mercy based on what is found in Exodus 34, and knowing that and she concluded the talk by saying, you know, the marker of what is true and good and beautiful is whatever increases your faith, hope, and trust in God. And it's a good litmus test of, you know, anything that we read, anything that we consume, if it helps us to grow in hope, in faith, and trust in God and his church, then we probably know that we're on the right path. If it leaves us anxious, if it leads us distrusting and hating our neighbors, then we could probably know that the devil is trying to sow something within us.
Great point.
So that's a summary of their talks. And as a whole, you know, our viewers can look forward to receiving these talks for a modest fee. We at Paleocrat Diaries and at TradRecovery don't believe that a worker should forego their wages in producing what they do. Our speakers and everyone put in a lot of work in preparing these talks. So for a very modest fee, we'll put out these talks and they'll be available, and all proceeds will go towards the apostolate, with, you know, site fees, et cetera, so that the apostolate can grow. If you believe in what we're doing, then we kindly ask that you contribute. So that's question 2. So thanks for sharing that, guys. And we're over an hour. So I think I actually just want to ask if there were any significant encounters that you had during this conference, or one story that made a significant impression on you regarding the TradRecovery Apostolate, or the effect of this conference on people. So I guess I'll go bottom of the alphabet, Jeremiah.
So the joyfulness of the participants when we went to the Airbnb at the end, you know, after it had closed shop and stuff, and even every day when we'd be outside eating food and drinking and smoking and all that stuff, that there was a joyfulness about it. And some of the people, I'll give you 2. Other than Sister Eucharista, because I could heap tons of stuff on every person here and everyone that we've talked about, but I want to talk about the people for a second. So we had someone, while we were there, a very generous person, bought all of the books that we had on the table, all the ones that were there, and said, how many do you have? Okay, we got this many. And paid maximum price for it. And then said, give them out. Just give them to the people. And it was awesome doing that because I got to meet so many, right? 17. I got to meet 17 people and go up and talk to them for a second. And there was a conversation with 2 ladies. They were making the food. They were at the stove. And they had some questions about the book. And so I went up and I talked to them. And it got to a certain part, I just choked up. I did. And all of them at the same time, like choked, like, oh. And I think these ladies rushed and they're like hugging me and I'm like crying right there in the kitchen. And but it was an awesome moment. It was personal. It was relational. It edified and built up, right? Because it was an inspirational thing we were talking about. Not super sad. We're talking hope and silver linings. And then the most for this one, and I'm excluding conversations with everybody on the panel here, is Anastasia. Anastasia is an awesome gal. Her and her husband, the whole family. And I'd seen a particular image here, and I don't know. Oh, it's behind me. It is a very beautiful, we'll have to move it and kind of get it in a different place. It's a very beautiful carving of Our Lady of Perpetual Help. In fact, here, hold on. Let me get up for a second. Hold on. I'm going to show this thing to you.
Yeah, I've got the same thing over my shoulder here too. Our Lady of Perpetual Help. She's one of our patronesses of Paleocrat Diaries.
There we go.
Very significant help to what we want to do.
My headphones on. Give me a second.
Yeah.
Okay. Here we go. It's worth it. I promise. I promise. Right here.
Oh, wow.
So this.
Wow.
That's incredible.
Just absolutely stunning. This was at the booth. And I had talked to the daughter. I said, hey, how much is this thing? And she told me. And it was a good penny. I mean, this is beautiful. It is absolutely stunning. And I said, okay, I'm going to talk to my wife about this and see if, it kind of fits in with what we're going to do. And I said, but it's really important because Our Lady of Perpetual Help is the patroness, right? She is the one that we've chosen, and she's chosen us at Paleocrat Diaries. We have a Redemptorist, a group of Redemptorist priests over at St. Alphonsus here in town. They do special devotions on Wednesday, commitments to Our Lady, and have a beautiful image there. And I said, so it's an important thing. And I just left it. After it was over, she came up to me and she kind of, she's walking by and she thanked me for what I had done in the lead up and the ways that I had helped in any way. And she said, I mentioned, she said, I'm giving this to you. I only say that. I normally don't like to name the people, right, who do tremendous things like this. But it was such a powerful thing. And afterward at the Airbnb, I think we were the last ones out, weren't we, David?
Yes.
It was. It's true. And it was such a joy to talk to her and to hear her story and hear her family's heart. And so I just wanted to say that encounter and this, what came from this, and this is what I'm saying, beautiful things are coming from this. Beauty, right? Powerful, uniting things that are prophetic, things that are just outright awesomeness. And so I wanted to thank her in particular, as well as the two ladies who cried with me for a brief moment there, right over at the stove in the kitchen, surrounded by people, very joyous and just happy. And I think I even asked you, David, didn't I, quietly? I said, or was it Andrew? I said, listen to all these people. Like, just listen for a second, how much laughter is in the room, how much genuine happiness, gladsome hearts all around. And I think that says a lot about our movement. I think it says a lot about what's going on, is that we're gladsome, we're joyful, and we exalt his name because he's done great things in us.
Thank you. That's awesome. Awesome. Dom, any encounters or experiences you want to share?
No, yeah, there was a profound joy from the beginning to the end that honestly surprised me. I mentioned the pain and the isolation that people were telling me about, and others as well. But throughout it, there was this like sense of like relief and joy and peace that I don't know. I felt like I was just imbibing it all around me. But my favorite part of the entire conference was the dinner at the end of the last day. I cannot tell you how hard I laughed at some of the stories that people were sharing with me, that we were sharing. I was almost crying laughing so hard. I mean, I found out that some people related to Pope Peter II, Pope Pius XIII. There was like the things like Sedevacanta stories, or people who know Mel Gibson and stuff like that, right? Crazy stuff. People getting married several times. I was in my element. That was the most fun I had in a very long time. So I just wanted to emphasize that. And I don't know. I won't name them. But there was this one couple that really made me laugh, and also I felt like a lot of, I don't know, love towards them, and I could have spent, I don't know, the whole week just talking to them. So that was the highlight for me, was that last dinner. Of course, just talking to people throughout and the sense of joy that was there. But the last dinner was my highlight.
Great. That's great. Andrew.
Yeah, I think that Dom and Jeremiah have captured my experience. I too shared their same experience of it. And especially in contrast with other conferences that I've attended. There was actually one conference that promotes the liturgy. And so there are a lot of people who are there, especially to promote the old rite, or back when I attended the conference, it was called the Extraordinary Form. And even though there were a lot of beautiful people there, and I did have some amazing interactions with several of them, there was a little bit of an edge there. And I think part of that was brought by some of the presenters who were there at the liturgy conference. They brought an edge that dampened, you might say, the joy a little bit. And it was, I found it to be sad. But, you know, that was definitely in contrast to this conference, which again were people who were just so happy to be in the full life of the church, to be together, to not be alone on their own, trying to figure out what to believe and how to worship anymore, but being that strength of the family of Jesus, of the people of God. There's an underlying peace and joy there that I think was especially captured in the person of Sister Mary Eucharista. So, Sister Mary Eucharista, if you are watching this, we nominate right now, after post-conference, you were the conference mascot. So that's now as your title for the Catholic.
She was amazing, and she drove this massive truck.
Yes. Oh, it was wonderful. Yeah, watching her drive Father's truck around with her habit poking out of the front in the driver's seat, and with holy smokes on the license plate. Oh, it was wonderful. But I would leave you an image that I think really captures the feeling, because, of course, it wasn't just a feeling of shared joy of all being in the fullness of the faith and the fullness of the church, to be in communion, but it was also, in these conversations, there was also a shared camaraderie of having experienced something very difficult. And I think it's really well captured by that scene in The Return of the King, when all the hobbits are back in the Shire and they're drinking in the Green Dragon, and life hasn't even changed. Nothing's different. Everyone is it's that beautiful atmosphere of the Shire, and they're just looking at each other, knowing what each of them has been through together. And they're so glad to be home, but yet each of them has this kind of shared camaraderie of having been to Mordor and back, and gone through very painful and frightening and difficult experiences. But now there's an underlying redemption of those experiences that has drawn them closer together. And I think that really, really captured how we all felt together there at the conference.
And if I could add the cherry on top, in fact, referring right back to the guy who was just talking, are you my mother? I think that phrase, are you my mother? Like, because he read it out loud. It was a fantastic read, by the way. You're really good at that. And I was sad when it stopped, but I'm happy because, found his mom. But he's doing a good job. So, but that's really what we've gone through ourselves. That's the question. And at the end of the day, are you my mother? Are you my mother? And it's been powerful to see how different people came to it. And I should add, with Sister Eucharista, she knew Bishop Schuchart. So that's a crazy story. It's not, she didn't even go into all that, but I mean, it's super duper wild, the whole ride, how that came about. And the CMRI, I mean, it's the birth of the CMRI. And so it was great, but I think that phrase, on top of all the things said, that's really what this conference in many ways was about, and that we have come, we're gladly on the knee of our mother now.
Yes, I can echo all of your experiences. I met some wonderful people, but I wanted to give particular spotlight to Kyle Whittington and his presence at our conference. I became his official, unofficial chauffeur throughout the conference, and I was, he came in sober, obviously, but with a sober disposition to poke holes, to be a sober critique or a sober critic of the conference. And by the end of it, he was giving interviews to some of the speakers and those involved, and said, he said it himself. He's like, I really don't have much I disagree with you all about. What you're doing here is special and important. And so he came away very edified, and I was really glad to have him there, because he was a very special contribution He's a wonderful person, a wonderful personality. And so we were glad to at least have someone who wasn't just a yes man for us, but someone who came to ask the hard questions of all of us to keep us honest. So,
and one of his things that he was critical of was what has been already talked about, the name of the apostolate itself. But look, it's actually a definition and things that are even debated inside of this four-boxed group. And so it's something, it's not just outside, it's inside. And I think that makes it relational too. Yeah.
He's way too short.
Oh, yeah. And I saw him everywhere. I'm not going to lie. I saw him out in Ohio. He'd been calling me like all week before that, before the Creators Conference. And then I went down and I stayed with Jake and his family down in St. Louis. And next thing I know, on the last day that I'm there, we're getting food and stuff at this big, beautiful place. It's got games everywhere. It's total fun. And all of a sudden, in comes Whittington. I'm like, what? And I forgot that that's where he's from, right? And so he had some reason he had to go family thing down there. And he said, well, I'll just meet up with these guys and get some food. So he did. And then I see him in Montana. I'm like, dude, why don't you just like hitch a ride, man? Get a little camper and put it in the back.
Yeah,
it was hilarious. Yeah. He's an amazing guy, and he's one of those rare souls, kind of like David, who's able to take people who can be fiery and they can be kind of wild, and he has a heart that would like to resolve issues between people and friends. He's got friends. Yes, he's a peacemaker, and he's got friends across the spectrum, pretty far out, but he's really clear with them too. That look, I totally, so he's an honest critic, and he's a really good guy. And I'm proud actually to say that I know him.
Yes.
Yeah.
So to close off, one final question. What are your hopes for the conference and the TradRecovery Apostolate moving forward? What do you feel are the important objectives for the apostolate moving forward, given the success of this conference? And no particular order. It's if whoever wants to take the mic first.
Yeah, just to real quick add 2 cents. I would say that the future, I think, is a place for people a place where people can go when they come to the realization that maybe they should be in the Catholic Church, and they come from these groups. If they're cut off from the church and they realize, what, maybe I got this wrong. They have a kind of moment of humility, and they realize that they're isolated. Then this is somewhere they can go. And that to me is so important, especially for this. It's a rather unique experience. Our demographic is not very large. And a lot of people kept telling me how isolated they felt. So that is what I see this being, is a place for people who want to realize that the Second Vatican Council is actually a great thing. All right, that's it.
Okay. Andrew, Jer.
Yeah, I totally echo what Dom is saying. TradRecovery was founded by Laura and the other founders of the apostolate with truly a mother's heart, which was to care for people. And I actually think that the struggle and the controversy over the name is actually a sign. It's actually a sign of the struggle that's happening within the church itself. And within the traditional movement itself. So I think it's actually, again, even more appropriate because it shows the deep truth of the mission of the apostolate, which is to put people, again, that theme that Sister gave us for the conference, to put relationship before identity, because relationship is meant to form identity. And the apostolate is all about helping people to reestablish that in their minds and in their hearts and in their souls.
Very good. Jeremiah.
Things like that I would hope and I think are coming about are kind of creating an organization more officially from this. I mean, it coalesced. It presented itself, right? So I think that's a good step. I think that will brand it much better. To maintain that ministerial approach, I think that's going to be a balance, though, because the apostolate itself and the conference itself, it's kind of like I'll make my stand or I'll take my stand. the Southern agrarians is kind of laying down a line and saying, they didn't entirely agree, the contributors to that, and Who Owns America, which Belloc wrote for that one, in the final chapter of it, but that's kind of what came from this. It was twofold. On the one hand, it was very ministerial, very interpersonal, and the other one was, again, coming to terms, laying down lines, saying this is how this works. This is how this can be done. So I think that connecting people now, whether ministerially or ministerially, but also with content creators, like I proposed. I'll just say it. I proposed to do the idea of doing a book, right? Publishing St. Francis de Sales' book and having comments and commentary in it with Andrew and others who would like, to bounce ideas off each other and to say, how can we show how this is played out and how these are in fact the answers? How would it read? Where would the footnotes be? To show the force of it and see how he develops his argument, because he's just masterful. He's a doctor of the church for an awfully good reason here, for many, many, but this included. And so I think connecting people together, promoting ideas even in a scholarly way, man. Dom's presentation, holy cow, it was awesome. The depth and the richness, and that we maintain that balance and that tension that comes from being Catholic, that people are there for different reasons. We have a goal and a mandate, in fact, to go out and preach the gospel in a holy manner, and to do that, especially to those prodigals who, for whatever reason, have found themselves preferring anything other than the bark of Peter.
Awesome. And my own hopes, I thought Montana was a great location for the first conference, and it was evident of the participants that there were a lot of people who were formerly within the CMRI, which I understand the home base, the HQ, is in Washington State. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So okay. It was in close proximity, and it drew a lot of former CMRIs there. My hopes is maybe I don't know, and perhaps this is in the plans, maybe it's a possibility, but maybe to move to a different part of the country where a different hotspot can occur, maybe somewhere in the Midwest, in Kansas, St. Louis, where we would have a demographic of former SSPX. There's different groups, different problems. So, this will be something in discussion. Montana is beautiful. It was a great place for the initial, and maybe it will continue to be our home base, but I think we have other battlegrounds to cover and more people to meet and more people to connect. And, it would be great to have Andrew Mione to be part of the conference as well. He had a family commitment, but having him in the future, I think his book sold pretty well at the conference too. So we're glad to report on that front. And so
great book. Buy it.
Yes. Buy it. I think you're so right, man, that, having an East Coast, and I think is obviously going to be in the works because it was so good. And we know that it's not just this, that what will be presented, people will identify with all over the place. They're going to say, yeah, I may not experience something so extreme, but that means that you're within that range because they've gone further. So people, the fascination with it, you're going to have, my guess is East Coast, West Coast, Midwest stuff. And that this will always kind of be home base. You know what I mean? Like, say that's home base out there, man, out in the sticks with those beautiful mountains that are just absolutely stunning. And, but to do that and to recognize, like, where would we go? Yeah, of course. Places where there are hotspots. Get near there. We have people who can organize, including Terry Fowler, Jake's wife, organized a remarkable day on my wife's birthday. It was just totally amazing all the way down the line, all day long. And so we have people, even a guy in Kansas City who said that that's what he does. He organizes events and puts people together. So this sort of thing, if you want this thing to come to your town, dead serious, let us know and come alongside what we're doing, sponsor what we're doing and be part of it, because as I said, this is going to affect a lot of people in a positive way. That it's going to be, it's gladsome and joyous and just beautiful, the whole event, and you're going to love it. The people that won't, it will be an ideological divide, and that's part of, in fact, one of the speeches. So I won't say anything more.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right, gentlemen. Any closing thoughts before we wrap it up for the night?
No.
Nope.
Good. We covered a lot, and
Yeah.
I'm really grateful for your time.
Yeah.
I'm really grateful to have met you all, and I'm really hopeful for what will continue to come out of this apostolate and the future of this conference. I know we're doing good things. We're, as we like to say at Paleocrat Diaries, we are standing on the shoulders of giants.
Yeah.
You know, our predecessor saints have given us a lot of great material and a great attitude with which to approach problems of division within the church. And all we have to do is follow their example, but do it in a way in which we reflect our own goodness, our own gifts. And each of us here are so talented, have such different dispositions, different ways that we relate and interact with people. So lots of good things moving forward for this apostolate, I'm sure.
Amen.
All right. Well, as we always do close at Paleocrat Diaries, we sign off by saying, never give up, keep on smiling, and memento mori. For myself, David, Jeremiah, and our guests, Andrew and Dom, have a blessed day wherever you may be.
Amen.